I was gonna say we should do it while it's good.
Yes, please.
Okay. Welcome to yet another Drag Race Review podcast. I'm your host, Terry Blas.
And I am Chucho, Quintero.
And this is the J Word, your home for all things Drag Race Mexico. Hi.
Hello, you're watching the
So,
J Word.
the J Word. Well, let's tell people a little bit about why we wanted to call it the J Word. So that people who may not know have a little bit of context.
Yes, okay, so in Spanish, especially in Mexican Spanish, we have a bunch of different ways to say the F word, not F-U-C-K, but like the slur for gay people. And we have a bunch of them that we have reclaimed over the years, like maricon, marica. But one that I especially like, it's joto or jota or jotito. And the thing about that is that we used to use it, among ourselves. And a few years ago, social media platforms started censoring people who would use that word, so that people wouldn't use slurs. But they would also censor like gay people using a gay slur. So we started to come up with new ways to say the J word, and one of those was J words. So you would go like, "Oh yeah, I was meeting with this J word the other day," blah blah, or we're just a bunch of J words and blah blah, and so that's what it is, Joto, but like in a way that won't get censored.
So for someone who's absolutely puro gringo, like what does joto even mean? Like literally.
It is, but not like as strong as. I feel like it's more like sissy.
Yeah, but why would that, what does that have to do with the letter
Oh,
J?
oh, oh,
Is
oh,
what I
yeah.
mean,
Oh, okay,
right?
okay, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there was this jail. I mean, that's like kind of the urban legend that is the more accepted version of the thing, which is that there was this famous jail in Mexico City many decades ago, where they would arrest and imprison, a bunch of criminals, including gay people and queer people and gender non-conforming people. And there they had a special pavilion for them, like a special kind of row of cells for them, and it was the J pavilion. So that's where it comes from, like the people in the pavilion Jota were the ones that were gay people and gender non-conforming people, so they were Jotos.
Right. Okay, good. Well, let's talk a little bit about why we're doing this podcast in the first place. You and I are both big Drag Race fans. We've been waiting forever for Drag Race Mexico, right? Drag Race Mexico, Mexico. It's going to be Spanglish, guys. We're going to go back and forth.
Me siento muy excited.
But you mentioned a little bit about how when we were talking about, what we were going to do, about how you and I sort of have this similar dynamic to Lolita and Valentina, who are the hosts. Tell me a little bit about that, about what you were kind of saying regarding that, because I think it's really on point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think I've never told you this directly, but I feel like my understanding and my approach to Mexican Americans has changed since we started being friends like a couple of years ago. Because what happened was, obviously here in Mexico, in mainland Mexico, we have this idea of like, oh, those are like not real Mexicans, because like
Yeah.
many of them don't speak Spanish and they don't have the same food and they don't have the same culture. And so, being friends with you, I kind of changed radically that idea. And now I feel like it's just different ways of being Mexican. And so for me, like the dynamic is similar between us than between them, because Lolita was born and raised here, and so she's like just a Mexican immigrant that just recently moved to another country. And Valentina is born and raised in the US. So, like, yes, they're both Mexican, but their understanding of how to be Mexican is kind of different, but they obviously have
Yeah.
a lot in common.
Yeah, I would say that I'm like almost fluent, like I'm close, but like, who knows what Valentina's Spanish is like. We'll probably talk about that, as the show goes on. But I think it's really interesting. Like, if you think back far enough, it's like our ancestors didn't speak Spanish and they weren't Catholic either. Or something that I tell people all the time. So yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic that hopefully people who like Drag Race, who are from the States, maybe I'll be able to sort of offer some context or something relatable. And then people who are in Mexico, you can do that for too. And who knows, maybe the opposite will even happen once or twice.
Yeah.
So that being said, I am going to give everybody 5 facts about you. Are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Can you guess what they are?
I have an idea.
Okay. So the first fact is that you are a writer and a filmmaker. I was going to say from Mexico City, but you're not from Mexico City. You just live there. And I think probably mostly known for your features Velociraptor and Los Días Particulares. Velociraptor! We both have dinosaur themes happening with us. We'll get there. And you also a short called Panquecito, and that Velociraptor won Best Feature at the 17th Miami Gay and Lesbian Film Festival. Is that right? Ooh, all right. She's fancy. The second fact is that you also are a professional translator and subtitler. I don't know how you say that, but that you subtitled over 52 movies.
Yes.
That's a lot. Okay. The third thing is that you are an avid Pokemon gay.
I am.
Right? Playing Pokemon with me, helping me out, playing Pokemon.
Wait,
So with like
I was trying to show, yeah. That
I was
am.
gonna say using images of Psyduck as your avatar across social media platforms. The fourth thing is that you bake and cook a decent amount, that you enjoy doing it. And that you recently made banana muffins and portobello mushroom, like stuffed portobello mushrooms. That sounds so good. I'm hungry. And the last thing is that you are a devoted uncle and doggy dad.
Yes. She's locked
All
out
right.
at the moment.
So is mine. So it's fine.
Okay.
All right.
So that's me. And so I'm gonna mention 5 facts about Terry Blas.
What
Might
what
not
could you
be
possibly have to say about me?
might not be as detailed as yours, but sure. So
It's fine.
Terry lives in Portland. I feel like that's important to mention. And he is a writer. He writes comic books, and he wrote this one. And he also wrote this one. And he also wrote this one for Marvel Comics.
I did.
Yes. And actually, here is one of my favorite characters in all the Marvel universe. It's a very recent character that I just discovered here that I really like. That is Julian Quintero. We are cousins, distant cousins. But he's the gay cousin of the protagonist, but he's so much more than that. He's basically a superhero. I don't know why I say basically. He is a superhero. But he's a swordsman, and he creates superhero costumes. So he's basically Edna Mode with swords.
And he's quoting Drag Race all over the
Yes,
over the
exactly.
book.
And also, you also are a human companion to a lovely dog, to a lovely hell beast called Alfie. And we share something, we share some stuff that you are a fan of, that that's how we connected, I think, at first, which is that you like anime and you like musicals and you like sci-fi and fantasy and all those things, which is like, that means I really like talking to you about all that stuff. And I know you also like baking.
Yep. What did I make recently? Lemon poppy seed cookies.
Yes.
I'm gonna make some chocolate haystack cookies today. So I thought the next thing that we could do is talk about a little bit about how we first came to drag, and sort of like how we discovered it. For me, it was obviously like before I even knew what drag was. It was like Bugs Bunny, and then of course like I think the first queen that I actually saw on TV or in a movie was actually RuPaul in the Brady Bunch movie, from the 90s, right? Playing Mrs. Cummings, the high school counselor. And I always love that she said, "Jan, come back when you're pregnant." This is and I think I've mentioned to you before that I thought it was such a waste that when Jan came back on All Stars,
Yeah.
she didn't come back to the workroom pregnant. Ugh. Okay. but yeah, I saw her, and then I remember having thoughts because I was, young, of like, but is that a man? But that's a man, right? Is that a man? Like, I don't, just like kind of the like thought process of like trying to figure it out. And then of course with like, Rue with Supermodel, and her Foxy Lady album, and I am old enough to remember watching episodes of the VH1, the RuPaul show, so I do remember that. And then of course like movies that, you know with like Mrs. Doubtfire, Tu Wong Fu. Tu Wong Fu is where I first discovered Coco Peru, who I loved, and love. I just thought that she was so different and cool and doing something different than the other queens. Um, and that's sort of some of my first exposure, I think, to drag in like movies and TV, or in general. Um, and then I went to my first drag show my first year of college, in Moscow, Idaho. The only thing I really remember is that there was a drag queen there named Miss Vicious that was performing, and that a drag queen was dancing. I was sitting in the front and like took my face and like, whatever. Um, it weirded me out because I was like, what's happening? I was so young. And then when I moved to California, I discovered Jackie Beat, who I think is one of the best. And I would drive down to West Hollywood and pay like $5 every week to see her perform, and host in a bar. And it was always great because there was like parody songs she would do, and then there was always improv, and she would go out into the audience and mess with people. It was always great. Um, and then, of course, when I went to Mexico City and visited you, I discovered, I think I had gone right after Pride happened. So there's still all this stuff up, all these like pillars up in what's it called? The Zócalo?
Mhm.
Yeah. And then I was like, what is this? Baile de los what? Los 41? What is this? And I had never heard of it. And you were like, Terry. And you told me all about it. And then I ended up for my 41st birthday doing drag to sort of like honor that. Which you can see the whole thing on like my Instagram or my TikTok or whatever, which you helped me make a video for. So that's sort of my exposure to drag and how I discovered it. What about you?
So mine was like I told you the other day that I love that we're talking about this, that I love that we're talking about how like you could ask any kid anywhere, in I don't want to say in the world, but like in the Western world, or probably in the world, we don't know. And they're all gonna have like some sort of first experience with drag, because drag is everywhere. Drag is in cartoons, drag is in mainstream comedy, like drag is in family shows, like drag is in myths and legends and culture, from each country in this world. So like there's no way that we cannot be touched by drag in one way or another.
Yeah.
And my family has always been like a big movie family. Like we will always rent like 2 or 3 movies every week from Blockbuster. That's how old I am. and
We're old.
and so I remember that they will just rent movies like in general, and we would just watch them as a family. And at some point, I'm pretty sure they rented To Wong Fu, but I don't remember like the entire movie, because I'm pretty sure that halfway through the movie they were like, you know what, maybe you should not watch this, because I was like 5 or 6 maybe. Which now in retrospect, like now that I've seen the movie, as an adult, it's a pretty light movie. That is not it's not very. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a children's movie, but it's not like an adult movie or something like that.
I like that your parents let you watch half of it when the beginning is like the beginning pageant has some of the like raunchier
Yes,
moments.
exactly. And maybe they were like, okay, this is enough, and then they kicked me out of the room. But that only made it like so much more interesting, because I was like, oh my god, what is this? Like, it's so fascinating because
Right.
it's forbidden, but then I feel like then later on, like we got cable and stuff, and I would always watch the E channel and VH1, and they both had these countdowns of like moments in entertainment or moments in the
Mm.
90s and stuff like that. And they would mention RuPaul all the time, like Supermodel, and there was also like no shade, but there was also like a one-hit wonders list, and
Mm.
Supermodel was there. Which, by the way, that's a mainstream thing, because like RuPaul has had many hits, but maybe niche. um,
Yeah.
but anyway, so yeah, that's what I found out about RuPaul. Like this character that wasn't well known in Mexico, but like in the US, it was like a big deal, and she was a drag queen and all those things. And that was kind of like when I met her. But then, like in high school, I went to a performing arts high school here in Mexico, so
Ooh.
we were all gay.
Talk about the talk about the J word.
That's where I came out. That's where I went to like my first gay bars. I shouldn't say that because I was 15, but like when my high school was right next to the gay neighborhood in Mexico City, Zona Rosa. So we would always be in Zona Rosa because we were gay and we were like, it's right there. And I would buy these bootleg copies on the street of like these queer classics that I had never seen before. And I was always like a big movie fan, but like the more art house things that I would see were like Miramax movies, and so that's where I found out about like Bruce LaBruce and John Waters and all these filmmakers that I wouldn't be able to watch otherwise. And that's where I found out about Divine. And for me, like this icon of like everything that is wrong in the world, everything that is like inappropriate and everything that is like punk and all that. To me, it was as fascinating as like, I wonder what's the second half of Tu Wong Fu, like drag has always been kind of like a mystery that I want to solve, and that's how I would say that's my root. That's my root in regards to Drag Race. Yeah, to Drag Race.
To drag.
Yeah.
So then what is your Drag Race route? How did you, discover that?
So weirdly enough, again, it's like mainstream stuff that made me find out about not so mainstream stuff, because I would watch The Soup in E! channel, and they would always make fun of like Joel McHale would always make fun of Drag Race, and he will especially make fun of like the lip syncs and stuff like that. And so I remember that the first time that it actually got like ingrained into my mind, it was the Milan versus Jiggly Caliente for Born This Way. That's the lip sync that he was making fun of. I don't even remember the jokes that he will tell because I was so focused on like, wait, two drag queens like just lip syncing to like a Lady Gaga song. Like, what is this? But there was no way for me to watch it, I think, or maybe they put it on VH1 or something, but I didn't know. And it wasn't until I guess a couple of years later when Netflix came to Mexico, and it was this streaming platform that was, beginning, and they had like seasons 1 through 6, and so that's what I watched. Like, I binge watched it in like, I don't know, like 3 weeks. I watched like 6 seasons of Drag Race, and then I watched like the last few episodes of season 7, and then I started watching season 8 like week to week.
Yeah, as it aired. My Drag Race route is just that I had started college again when I moved to Portland art school, and I was living on my own, and I don't know how I heard about it, but I heard that there was going to be this new show hosted by RuPaul, Drag Race, like the competition reality show. And I had watched so much America's Next Top Model that I was like, oh, this is probably going to be kind of like that. And so I got myself cable, and because it had included logo. I was like, all right. So I just started watching it since season 1, and loved it. But then it was on Gina who had that amazing episode where she wins the Viva Mac Glam whatever challenge. And that episode, if you're not familiar, go check it out, because that for me is what elevated Drag Race to something that was other than just a reality competition show. It made it a little bit more deep and meaningful and interesting. And then she was the first queen that I drew, and then I sent it to her on MySpace because it was that long ago. And she ended up using it for her shirts and for her merch, and we've kind of become friends ever since. But yeah, that's how I came to Drag Race. And then I've just watched it every season ever since.
Yeah, I love how like you mentioned MySpace for season 1, and then only 3 seasons later, they make fun of Chad Michaels for still having MySpace.
Chad Michaels, you so old. You still on MySpace.com, Chad Michaels.
I was gonna take that down.
So I want to talk about favorite seasons of Drag Race. Because because I think everybody has their favorites, you know, and a lot of times I think it depends on when you came to Drag Race. People sort of imprint on when they discovered it. Um, for some reason, my favorites are 5, 6, and 8. I think 5 and 6 is when it really hit its stride, I guess, you know. 6, I think, had the best finale. I think 5 had an amazing like set of queens who are very different from each other, and that was really cool. And 8, I think, just had really fun challenges and a really great group as well. I didn't include all-star seasons or international seasons, but what were some of your favorites?
I mean, my favorites would be season 6. I feel like that's kind of like peak Drag Race in terms of like they finally got like the format right and they finally knew
Yeah.
what they were doing, and every single queen is incredible in her own way. And then 8, for me, like I feel like, you know, 8 is very underrated because maybe I mean, it's shorter and it's like maybe not as fashion forward as other other seasons, but I feel like it's a more I don't know if it's kind of endearing, you know, in a way. Like the queens are very relatable, and the queens are all of them are very funny, you know, very funny to watch. So I feel like that's one of my favorites. And I did include the international seasons because I really love Drag Race España. I feel like at
It's
first it
great.
was like, oh, finally Drag Race in Spanish, you know, because we didn't have like Drag Race Mexico. Um, but then it kind of grew on me, and I was like, oh yes, like this is its own thing, you know, and I really like it. And I feel like España second season is like the one that I really like the most. I'm really liking this third season, but like it hasn't finished, so like I don't know if
Yeah.
it's gonna be you know, as great as the previous ones. But yeah, those are my favorite seasons.
I love how we both have 6 and 8 on our list. Do you remember the shade tree from season 8? Like they tried to make it happen and it
R.I.P.
didn't happen.
R.I.P. the Shade Three.
RIP the shade tree. Yeah. So, who are 3 of your favorite queen or favorite winners, I guess, from the show?
So my favorite winners are Bob and Jinx, you know, from my favorite seasons. But I also really like Evie Oddly. I feel like, you know, the way that her season happened, it was an unexpected winner because she didn't dominate the entire season. But then by the end of it, you were like, you know, of course she's gonna win. And I don't know, I respond to her weird kind of drag.
Mm. For me, I think I have a weird thing where I like separate Drag Race into everything before season 10 and everything after season 10. And so for me, Jinx, Bianca, and Sasha Velour are like my 3 of my favorite winners. But from the first 10 seasons. And then it's hard for me to choose because post season 10, I love Jada, Essence Hall, Willow Pill, and Sasha Colby. So I got to say 6, but whatever. Well, who are 3 of your favorite queens in general from Drag Race?
So I really love Trixie. I mean, we're not talking about
Who
all
doesn't?
winners, but yeah, I know people who don't, you know, people in you know,
Oh, wow.
friends and
Okay.
stuff.
Wow.
But whatever, we're not gonna talk about them. You know who you are.
Yeah.
So I really love Trixie, but also I really love like Ginger Minch and all these like kind of old school, you know, drag queens because like I mean the way that I would watch drag when I was growing up, it was like, you know, these old broads, you know, just telling like dad jokes on stage, you know, with like big wigs and big makeup. So any queen that is kind of like old school like that, like Ginger, like Miss Kasha Davis, like Darren Lake, like those are the queens that I really respond to because I would just love to spend an evening with them, you know. So yeah.
Mm,
What about
nice.
you?
Um, for me, Angina will always be on that list. I love her. And then it changes from time to time. Like right now, Trixie, just because I think Trixie is providing everybody with so much content. So there's so much that you can watch and so much you can, you know, dive into. And so that's great. But also I love Heidi. I love Heidi in Closet so much. Every time she's on the screen, it makes me happy, unless she's feeling like turmoil, which, you know, recently. Um, but yeah, those are my 3 I think favorite queens right now from Drag Race.
Okay. And do you have like a queen that you really like that is maybe not on Drag Race?
I think the ultimate for me is Coco Peru. Um, you know, aside from the fact that she's one of the first queens I ever saw, I just really respond to the idea. She told a story about auditioning for Tu Wong Fu and how everybody was doing these kicks and splits, and you know, and she was like, I can't do that shit. And so all she did was grab a cup and just like crush it, like in a fierce way, and they loved it. And you know, they put her in the movie, and I think that I love the style of like sort of monologue storytelling that she does. And not to be that person, but it will always be, I think, one of the coolest things, greatest things to happen to me that we've become friends. um, you know, so that's really great. I don't know. I love Coco. I think she's
Let me
so
pick
funny.
up the name you dropped.
Listen, it's gonna happen. Sorry,
Yes, I
sorry,
know,
it's
I
gonna
know.
happen. Um, but yeah, and she's introduced me to some great people, and I love all of the YouTube clips that she has, especially if you haven't seen her like playing Grand Theft Auto, it's amazing. So check that out. But yeah, what about you?
So I was thinking about this, like, you know, I mentioned Divine and all of that, but like I feel like because I'm a film person, you know, I make films and I translate films and I watch films. I feel like I really appreciate what hold on, what Harvey Fierstein does. Because he's someone that has created so much art, you know, in so many different mediums that is,
Mm,
you know, about drag or that has drag included in it. Like he wrote Touchstone Trilogy, which later became a movie, and he wrote the book for La Cage aux Folles, and then he also performed in La Cage aux Folles at some point, and he was in Mrs. Doubtfire, and he was in Hairspray, and he was in Hairspray Live. Like I feel like he's always somebody that I connect to drag in a way that is very like very personal and very like, no, I don't want to say serious because it's not like he creates like serious content, but he creates something that is very personal and very important, you know. But he always tends to include drag in it, and that's something I appreciate.
yeah, that's a great choice. I have written many a tweet that was like, how is this franchise, you know, UK versus the world, Canada versus the world, you know, like these versus the worlds. Like, do you mean the English speaking world? Do you mean because you're not including, you know, Central and South America. You're not even including all of North America if Mexico's not there. So I'm excited that finally I think we're getting that. There's so much amazing drag from South America, from Central America, and from Mexico that like it's time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like we have La Más Draga, and it's a great show, and it's a show that it's, you know, very special to me now that I worked on it. I haven't seen all seasons. I've seen season 1, 2, and 5. But I feel like as great as it is, and as great as the queens are, and as similar as the format is, it's not the same format, you know. And when you get the
Yes.
franchise and you put it in another country, the format stays the same. So every country kind of gives it, you know, their own flair, but it's still the same structure. And so that's, I
Yeah.
feel like that's what we're craving. We're craving for like the drag race format, but with Mexican queens, you know, and that's what we're gonna get.
Yeah, I think by default, so there are a couple queens, we can get into this later in our next episode, but there are a couple queens who were on La Mastraga who are competing on Drag Race Mexico. And I think if people, you know, come to like those queens and they want to see more from them, then it's just going to, you know, be good for La Mastraga and for exposure. That way it'll get more views and vice versa. You know, I think if you really love someone on La Mastraga and you find out they're competing on Drag Race Mexico, great, then you can watch that now too and see more of them. So
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. Well, that's our introductory episode.
Yes.
So this has been really fun. Chucho, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you?
So you can find me on Twitter mostly as Chucho_Q, and on Instagram as Chucho_QMP.
If you see a Psyduck, you know you found the
That's
right
me.
guy.
Yes. Also follow me on
You can
Letterboxd
find
if you like movies.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I guess after 7 p.m. you can find me on my couch. If you're online, you can find me on Twitter at Terry Blas or on Instagram at Terry Blas. You know, it's just my name all over. They said in art school it'd be easy to find. right? So all my social media is just Terry Blas. But that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Adios. Until next time.
Respeta tu cultura,
Respeta tu
maricón.
cultura, maricón.
Hoy es el 15 de septiembre, maricón. Respeta tu cultura, como el reggaetón.